following our conversation with Edgar last week, today I'm going to interview his teammate, Adriana Bora, who works at the Future Society. We're going to talk about the role of government in the technological advancements of AI. In many countries throughout the world, politicians still have no clue about how technology works. So if it's something that bothers you as well, then stay tuned to see what's being done about it. Apart from that, if you've been following our podcast for a while, you have already discovered a lot of cases where AI is used in a creative, compassionate, and collaborative manner. But today's case is quite a special one. It is about slavery. Yes, although everybody in the world agreed that slavery is something we do not want to see in any society, it continues to be an issue of great magnitude, even in the year 2020. Will AI be the modern Abraham Lincoln? Let's see. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. I'm Pavlo Samsky. This is Data for Future. So welcome, Adriana, to our podcast. I'm very happy to have a new guest in our show from a wonderful organization, which I'm very excited to talk about. Adriana is a researcher, is an AI policy researcher at the Future Society, and she has you have pretty similar background like me. So you hold master's degree in international public management, and you also studied international relations and some statistics, as far as I know. So I'm also from the background of international relations, and somehow I managed, or somehow life led me to tech. So I'm really curious to to ask you about your journey as well. So maybe this is a great place to start. How did you happen to be a policy researcher in AI?
Well, first of all, I'd really like to say thank you for having me here today. It's always so exciting to meet like-minded people and also discuss those topics that we are passionate about. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about those. And yeah, extremely interesting and happy to see more social scientists being driven towards the data science or the tech science part of research as well. I think for me was just extremely lucky to be in a university that was experimenting with quantitative methods, making them compulsory for social science students. So starting with basic econometrics, in a couple of years, I ended up doing machine learning, and it was just a great opportunity to see how multidisciplinary approach to research can lead to really innovative projects. And I think, as I said, I can only be grateful to have the right education access that led me to do this.
Interesting. I totally agree with this multidisciplinary approach, because I think now there are many new disciplines appearing, and they are so specialized, so deep, and somehow we need to see the whole picture. So I'm really grateful that I am in this kind of situation as well, because it's very interesting to see how they merge both social studies and something more technical. So now you're working at the Future Society. Before I start asking you questions about these organizations, can you explain what it is exactly? In your webpage, it's saying it's a nonprofit think tank. Could you say more concretely what is that you are doing and how you're doing that?
Sure. So indeed, at the Future Society, we are not for profit, and our structure is more of a think and do tank, because we do both research but also convening. So our day-to-day work really focuses on advancing the global ethical governance of artificial intelligence. This is our mission. So to do that, we pursue both the path of research and also the path of convenings and creating the right spaces for multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder profiles to come together and discuss the right approach to create this pathway of governance of artificial intelligence. So research, events, and we, with the Future Society, I think what is also important to mention is that it was initially incubated at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government around 5 years ago, and it started as a student association thinking about how can we tackle the future problems that emerging technologies, and particularly AI, can possess to society. And from there, it evolved to be a non-for-profit and now a think tank. And we're really expanding. We're going global. We are really expanding our profile and approaches to governance, and I'll be very happy to discuss a little bit more as we go in our conversation. But I hope this answers your question at large.
Wow, so it's just 5 years old, the organization.
Yeah, basically. I think it's 5 to 6 years old, yeah.
Wow. Well, the technology is developing so fast. I believe this is also why it's hard to keep up, but if you manage it, then probably you grow really fast as an organization like yours. And you probably have the broadest overview on the governance side of AI and policies throughout the world. What stage of development is it at right now, in terms of how good the governments actually understand what AI is doing and implement laws according to it?
Okay, yeah, so I think this is a very good question, and it's interesting to have this conversation now rather than having it 5 years ago, because you see that there is some progress made, and you're thinking, okay, compared 5 years ago, we really, you can see some governments taking the lead on this. You can see international organizations really opening conversation, writing papers on AI principle or ethical guidelines and so on. But I think the answer will be, it's not enough. It's not enough to keep up with the speed of development that comes with AI. And I think it is good to reward good practices, and it's good to mention, the governments that are taking the lead in this sense, and create AI national strategies, and we have quite a few of those. But to say, look, there is a place where these AI national strategies or the principles that are being created or any other instrument that fits into the governance of AI driven by the public sector is actually implemented in the day-to-day. And here, a very important aspect is to say that the governance of AI doesn't only come from the public sector alone. The private sector plays a huge, huge role in this, because it's not only about companies developing AI, but companies also adopt AI principles. They create their own instruments of governance of this technology. So what we're really hoping to see in the future is a better merge between the two, because the governance overall comes from this collaboration between public, government, academia, and also the companies from the private sector.
Yeah, totally agree. But I have one thing that interests me a lot is, how do you find the balance between action in terms of technological developments and policies, and this kind of contemplating on its consequences?
Well, in the very short answer would be, if I had the answer, I'll be extremely happy at this point, because this is what we were doing. So as I said, the governance of AI, the way we're seeing, is how can we mitigate any risk that AI can possess while at the same time not hurting innovation. So I guess this is exactly aligned with the questions that with your own question. So to get there, there are different approaches, and we are trying to explore to them. And looking at the global governance, you have so many different variables that can play into this, and different contexts, because each AI national strategy is different than the other. But these principles of optimization between innovation and ethics should be at the core of all of those, but it's not always as easy. So you hear a lot when you go to those conferences on AI, it's very often you hear some terms: misuse, misuse, and missing data, the 3M in AI. So they say, look, we are now, when we design this governance of AI, we are now in a position where we have to really think, okay, how can we misuse AI? What are the dangers around that? How do we misuse AI? Meaning we miss the chance to use AI for solving some of these really big issues that we are afraid of, increasing inequalities and all the other sustainable development goals associated risk. And then we say, well, we also have another issue of not taking into account all the missing data, the data that is needed for AI to be developed, but we haven't even thought about how to think what is data and how to structure that to use it in AI. So finding that central optimal point of all of this will be ideal. But I really believe that it's not a silver bullet, that there is not one model fits all. And I think trying to aim for that will be a mistake. We always have to sit and do that reflection that you mentioned, where you look at the context and you have your set of principles that everyone should agree on, and then you adapt that to your own context. That's what I think at this moment, and it will be interesting to see how this evolves.
Yeah, I guess this is when it comes in very helpful think and do tank like yours, where you see the global picture in different contexts in which to apply different strategies. So from your broad view and expertise, maybe just your opinion, where do you see the biggest positive impact possibility for humanity on side of AI?
You have to, what we observe is that in AI you have different tribes. This is how our president, for instance, Nicholas, is always called them. So you have the people on ethics, the people on development, and the people on the security side of AI, right? So people are really concerned about the ethical development, people that are looking how to apply AI for development, and then the safety aspect of AI. Of course, all of those overlap, but I do find myself quite biased or quite attracted to the side of AI development. So I believe AI can offer a really great opportunity for us to advance development in the world. So if we want to take, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals as the framework of development that we want to follow, we know we only have 10 years at our disposal to achieve them. And the problems that are covered by the Sustainable Development Goal being no poverty, zero hunger, to environment, life beyond water, economics, all of them are extremely complex. And we know that if we do not innovate and if we do not accelerate this process, we will not meet them. So I believe AI presents a great opportunity to do that. And I believe that one of the best place where it does it is it helps us create this evidence base that we need before acting on this sustainable development goals. So in terms of research, in terms of understanding the world before acting and finding solutions, AI can play that role. And because it can exponentially accelerate some of the mechanisms in this, it creates that, compresses that timeline that we have. So many examples already show how AI is applied on Sustainable Development Goal, being efficiency in cost savings, access to goods and services, economic growth. We have satellite imageries being applied for environmental and humanitarian aspects. Closing the barriers in language translation, etc., etc. So, we can discuss more use cases, but we already see a lot of benefits that AI can bring. But we have to be very careful about the challenges that also comes with that.
And talking about the challenges, where do you see the biggest dangers in terms of these technological trends?
I think this feeds a bit into our conversation about not having the right governance, not finding that place, or you get so enthusiastic about developing AI because you want to improve your market share or your innovation place as papers as an academic, or you want to, as a policy maker, you want to resolve poverty once and for all. And you know you have your solution and you do not stop to think, is this the right one? I can solve in the short term something, but what are the consequences in the long run? So not having the ethical aspect embedded into the design or into the design of the technology itself or the design of the policy, it is one of the biggest dangers. So we know very well how AI can, instead of doing what we initially want to do with it, for instance, inequality, right? If we want to apply this inequality, but we do not look at our data set, and many great examples have shown how, because our society is so biased already and the data is representative of that, if we use the same biased data in now in those algorithms, what we're going to do is actually deepen the inequality gaps rather than trying to solve it. And I think some of the very big issues are bias, lack of fairness, surveillance. We hear about cybersecurity, weaponization of AI, inequality, the loss of jobs, and many actually unforeseen risks that AI can possess. So we have a lot to work to ensure that we try to mitigate as much as possible for those easy to see and maybe some of hard to predict risk before and during the application of AI for social good.
Mm-hmm. How does it work, by the way, when you say you predict the possible negative outcomes? Is it like a hackathon where people gather and they think about, okay, let's imagine I'm a dictator. How will I use it, or how does it work exactly?
No, I mean, I wouldn't know if that will ever be the case for hackathons. I think hackathons are really great tools to use. And normally in the hacking traditional way, you do mainly the coding and you try to solve problems and do it really fast. But there are a lot of like legal hackathons where people also have this educational aspect of in the policy debate side, and then the third pillar will be the coding. So it's not only the coding, but I'm not sure if any of those really stop and think about the ethical governance, but I would love to hear more about them. But I think in terms of understanding the risk, here is where the communication, the multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder communication plays crucial role. So you have these leading experts in their own field coming with their own experience that have been working with other technologies or even with AI technologies, and then they understand the technology, or they can understand the impact of technology on society, and they come together and discuss, and they create this understanding of possible risk, and then they create the guiding documents and principles around that. And it is, I think, with that, some of them you learn as you do, and you tend to fail and learn. And we have some really interesting examples where people have deployed AI to recognize faces, and then when they try to do that on Black people, they are identifying them as monkeys. It's the most famous case that people say.
Yeah.
So that's a good example of failing and doing, but with what consequences, at what price you create that algorithm. But others, so that's in a way that could have even been seen already as a risk, but maybe it was not that obvious. But then after that, everybody knew, we need to increase our representative of our data if we want our algorithm to work on all the different facial structures and the different parameters that we want to take into account. But other times with the unforeseen risk, this is more of a, qualitative and theoretical discussion and learning from the past, trying to not do the same mistakes, but also create this framework for envisioning the future and where AI will play in different scenarios, like a game theory, and then you so this, I say there are a lot better prepared people than me that are doing this, and you have really great institutions of research really focusing on this, on the long-term security risk that AI can possess to society. And I think their methodology will be really interesting to explore in depth.
Yeah, I guess this is also where social sciences come in very handy, like philosophy.
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan of Yuval Noah Harari. I think he has like a brilliant mind just to contemplate on dystopian futures, but it's needed. It's needed as well to see how it might go wrong.
And you see in the conferences of AI, you always have writers coming to speak, and you need that multilateral thinking approach to envision all those scenarios, because I believe that some of those, the future could be extremely surprising even for us, and if we do not prepare for worse, will be very hard to justify our decisions in the present later on. So it's a bit intimidating, but it's very important work that those people are doing.
Definitely. So you're working now on one very interesting project I've heard of, which is called AI Against Modern Slavery.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about what is the goal of the project, and what do you mean by modern slavery actually?
Yes. Yeah, I would love to. So this project is what drives me towards creating this, regarding your first question, the multidisciplinary profile, because I was a student of international relations. I was in my third year of studies, and then in one course, somebody comes and tells us there's slavery in the world, and we're like, what? we know so much, because everything we study is how bad this world is, right? When you study international relations, it's kind of your day-to-day reading, and then now you tell me there is slavery. We dealt with slavery in the past, right? And then since then, it was like 2015, around that time, and I started researching and realizing there was not a lot of research happening at that moment. And since then, a lot more publications have appeared, and one aspect that still is not very clear is a common agreed upon definition of modern slavery, and there is not one there. Because before slavery was understood, before its abolition, you knew exactly the type of relationship between enslaved and the slaveholder, and there were records about it. But now slavery becomes an under-the-ground crime, so it's extremely hard to quantify, especially. But to be able to quantify, you need a definition. So now, for measurement purposes, to understand how many people are enslaved in the world, there is a leading publication by the ILO and Minduru Foundation, where they say, well, modern slavery is a situation where a person cannot leave the situation because they're being coerced or violence is being applied against them. So in simple terms, somebody is the property of another person. So now, modern slavery takes many different forms. It can vary from human trafficking to forced labor, to child labor, to sexual exploitation, removal of organs, and forced marriages, forced begging, etc., etc. And all of those forms of modern slavery, they have different variation across the globe. But what we know today is that we have approximately 43 million people being enslaved in the world following these approximations, Global Slavery Index. And 1 in 4 people enslaved is a child. And, as I said, you tend to look more on certain types of abuses depending where you are, right? So if you are in India or if you are in some communities in Romania, you look at forced marriages because in forced marriages this is part of the culture. If you're in Thailand, you look at the forced labor of men in the fishing industry because these are things that now are popping up. But there's everything: sexual exploitation, child abuse, forced marriage are happening everywhere in the world, from Australia to UK to Spain to US. It's just very hard to quantify. However, more and more research, as I said, is start looking into it. The civic society, the NGOs are proving more and more that people are being enslaved. And then you have big events that, like the Rana Plaza when it fell in Bangladesh, and all these garment workers were proven to be working under slavery conditions that then feed into the supply chain of big corporation and then touch our day-to-day life. So we are active members of this crime without us knowing it. So what we are trying to do with this project is to look what companies are saying they're doing to make sure that slavery doesn't exist in their supply chain. So we have a legislation that was passed in the UK requiring companies, to publish a report saying how they are dealing with slavery in their supply chain. And then Australia published a similar law, and then others are doing that. But since 2015, when this law was published, now we have a few thousand reports. And normally they're being analyzed manually. They have volunteers reading them and saying, this report is empty, or this report doesn't say anything, or this one says they have whistleblowing policy and training on employees, etc., etc. And because each year we have thousands and thousands of reports, what we're doing is trying to apply AI to make sure we automatize this benchmarking, and then we can spend more time with the analysis and feed this back into policy and asking for a little bit more teeth on this legislation.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And when you say, like, the number 43 million of slaves in 2020, like, I mean, we often hear child labor. Yeah, it's very sad, but, well, child labor. When you say slavery, it's like a totally different, it has a totally different meaning. And actually, when you say the definition, I couldn't agree more. It's like, it's not freedom for these people. It's like population of Spain, basically, where I'm living now. And in these conditions, it's, yeah.
Absolutely. And, there are different sensitivities. So culturally, we have different sensitivities to different wars. So slavery seems to be it's a red line in international public law. It is something that all of us universally agreed we don't want it, right? So of course we don't like to hear it. But then when we look at these different types of abuse, it is still exactly the same thing. People being kept by other people and they're not allowed to leave, or otherwise they're gonna, and there are many other aspects. People are being disposable now. The value of a person enslaved nowadays is lower than ever before. It is so cheap to get rid of people because there are many factors playing into this, but it is a crime. If somebody, in the fishing industry in Thailand, they take the man, they put them on the boat, they never sees the shore, and then if they try to leave, they just shoot them, or they feed them only rice until they're malnutrition and just throw them on the board if they die. And you're thinking, well, wait a second, are those people fishing the streams or the fish that I'm eating from this supermarket? And then some correlation, and you don't want that to happen. You don't want anyone to be enslaved, and if you could control and help to that, I think we should all have enough information to make informed choices on our purchases, so we do not we try to eliminate this crime. Yeah.
And if the algorithm does find, I believe it's the natural language processing algorithm, probably. If it finds clues to, like, that there is some evidence there is slavery in the supply chain of a particular company, what happens then? Like, is the company forced by the government to, I don't know, solve this issue, or how does it work then?
No, that would not happen because it's very unfortunate. And we try not to wear too much of an advocacy hat on this because it's important to observe that companies that do more to encourage that behavior. So if a company, we are only analyzing what companies are telling us, only what they publish. So we encourage companies, look, if you identify a case of slavery anywhere in your supply chains, please tell us, right? That's like, it's good to see, and it's good to see how you remediate that situation, how you help those people being lifted from that situation of abuse, and maybe you create different contracts with that supplier, and you make or identify new suppliers. Anyway, you help those people, and we need to identify those best practices so then we can tell to the other companies that work in similar industries, say, look, this company here found it that in this area, in tier 3 of the supply somewhere in, I don't know, Pakistan or maybe next door, I don't know, to their headquarters, they found this type of abuse. You work in very similar supply chains. Go there and investigate. Maybe you are also linked. And this is a way for you as a company to prevent yourself from being exposed to that risk, because no company, really wants to be connected with slavery and that coming out public before they say, look, we know and we're acting on it, and we're sorry, we don't want to participate in that. What is happening nowadays is that companies are claiming they're against modern slavery. You'll always see that, we're very much against that. But then when the civic society comes and say, hey, you Instagram, you have a page where people can sell people, and on your statement, the one that we are analyzing, you're saying that you're against modern slavery. But then here, people can put a picture of a home cleaner and say for sale, and you have that on the internet, on your platform. How is that happening? So you see, the government, the law doesn't have this right to say you are going to, on the law, their only request is to publish a page with the signature from the board. So it can be an empty page with the signature on their website, and that's still okay by law. So it's not a very strong legislation at this moment. In the UK, they recommend the companies to go more in depth and discuss other aspects, but that's a recommendation. But hopefully soon enough, if we can prove, that companies are saying something, but maybe not enough, what are the best companies on disclosure, then we can give that evidence base to the government and to the legislation and say, look, we should change our approach to that. But no, we will not be able to identify if slavery happens in supply chain. We'll only identify if companies said or didn't say that. And then, once we have this data structure, it would be interesting to be merged with other data sources that look at incidents and then see, just as the example that I gave to you, when the company says something, but the reality on the ground shows something different. And that's the beauty of big data analysis maybe happening in the future.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I hope it will provide for more transparency. This is important in many ways, as greenwashing, or even as if companies are not claiming to be sustainable. But I mean, having slavery in your supply chain, as you said, no company wants to have it, to admit it. So yeah, I hope it would be obligatory someday, at least in Western states, that this company do something about it.
Yeah, well, yeah, we will be. You will see, since this, so California published the first law, but then the first national law of transparency in supply chain was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the UK one, 2015. Then you have Australia. Now, Norway, Canada, the EU, France published a really great similar law. So, there is a domino effect on this. So more and more governments are going to approach it. But it's important, as you have learned from the past, learn from the mistakes of the other governments, and try to come with the right level of regulation from the start. So then it will be easier for you and for the companies that have to comply as well. Because it's really important to make this process fair.
Wow. Yeah. Well, now like I see better, I guess, what kind of important role you play in this whole situation, in this whole development. I guess we're running out of time. Before I let you go, would you like to share how can people find you on the web?
Oh, well, again, thank you so much for offering me the chance to talk about those issues that I'm working on every day. And again, those are just opinions. I'm still learning. I have lots to learn to be able to, to advance in this domain. But I will always be extremely happy to have conversation and to learn from people. So I am on the Future Society website, and there you're going to see some extremely interesting profiles from my colleagues as well. Everybody comes with very diverse and very interesting expertise. So we are very friendly and very happy to discuss with everyone. And personally, I really believe in coordination to advance. It's so important to coordinate and make sure you're not duplicating work, so we can actually advance as quick as possible on these really pressing issues that society is facing, so we can play our role. So always happy to communicate. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here. So that pretty much wraps up our episode for today. How was it for you? Have you enjoyed? Please leave your feedback for us. This is the best way for us to grow and develop. I will leave the link to a questionnaire we've created, which is super short and super fun. If you do enjoy our episodes, then consider supporting us on Patreon so that we can continue the flow and create more of quality content for you. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.